First three verses of chapter 27 we talked about last week. Verses 1 and 2 talks about a braggart, and I think we came to the conclusion that nobody likes a braggart. And if you are bragging about yourself, then you have a big, big problem. Because if you're the only one that's praising you, then that means that your impact upon others, there's something wrong with that. And in verse 3, the Bible refers to it as a person as a fool who is out of control, easier to deal with a load of stone or dirt than it is to try to deal with someone who cannot control themselves. And so we're going to pick up our study with verse 4, and we have one more verse of a negative nature, and then we'll consider a couple of positive. But verse 4, wrath is cruel, anger is overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy? Jealousy has done lots of negative things to people over years. It's ruined marriages in some case. It's caused people to even kill each other. You can deal with the outburst of a temperamental person a lot easier than you can deal with someone who just continues to revel in and to brood and to continue to harbor jealousy in their life, because it's eventually that jealousy that someone is harboring will eventually, and it's never satisfied until it conquers its enemy, whoever that may be. James says in 3:16 that where jealousy and selfish ambition are, there will be disorder and vile practice. You look up the definition of that word vile, it's a pretty strong word. It's abhorrent, okay? It's despicable. So jealousy will breed from it many behaviors and many attitudes and many words that are abhorrent and despicable and absolutely intolerable. Now we want to go to verses 5 and 6. Now 5 and 6 shifts gear in that now it's going to, in verses 5 and 6, specifically talk about the relationship of a friend and what a true friend will do, or the relationship that true friends have with each other. Better is often rebuke than hidden love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse or deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. Hopefully, all of us have the attitude that a sincere friend will tell us the truth even if it's going to hurt us. Okay? A true friend will not leave something that needs to be corrected unchecked. If you call yourself a friend, but you're afraid to tell a friend something that they need to hear because you're afraid that it might offend them, you're not a true friend. Because it may be the very thing, and you may be the only person that will tell them something that's going to preserve their soul. And obviously, that's the most important consideration that we're talking about. Now, it is true that there are other, perhaps, lesser matters than soul preservation and in the things we go about doing every day that need to be said also. But a true friend will not withhold rebuke. If I need to be rebuked about something, then I expect my friends to do that. And all of us should welcome that, because rebuke that censors a fault is more beneficial, of course, than disguised love that never has the courage to say what is needed. Let's look at Galatians. In fact, someone turn to Galatians 6, verses 1 and 2, please. Whoever gets there first can just start reading it. Galatians 6, verses 1 and 2. Okay. Now, verse 6 just reinforces verse 5 and adds to verses 5 and makes it clear that expressions of phony love are of no value. A person who just flatters you superficially or unnecessarily, that's not doing anything for you, will not do anything for you. Remember that a rebuke spoken in love is far better than either not saying anything or flattery that is undeserved. Okay? And remember, the thing we have to keep in mind, that it was a Judas kiss that betrayed our Savior. Someone who was supposed to be a friend of Christ betrayed him. Okay? And it's not important what he got for that betrayal, because ultimately it didn't have any value to it anyway. The point is that being a phony friend, or as we say sometimes a fair weather friend, but really we're talking even more seriously being a phony friend, okay, is of no value. Okay? Any questions, comments on verses 4, 5, 6? Yes, Mary. Oh, I know it is, but it's something we have to do. You know, one of the most difficult parts of being a shepherd in the Lord's church is when you have to rebuke someone. It really is. It's not easy. But you have to remember, especially if their soul is at stake, not only do we as brethren have a responsibility, but if you truly love your brother and want to see them go to heaven along with you, okay, they need to hear it, okay? Because they're not going to hear it from someone outside of the church for sure, okay? Yes, Jason. Yeah. And some Proverbs here later in this chapter will talk about that. Right. It talks about how one responds to proper rebuking. Says a lot about that person's character. Okay, now we're going to go. We're going to go to verses 7 and 8, which are on the other side of the fence, so to speak, because we're going to talk about some negative attributes or some negative characteristics. Verse 7, one who is full loathes honey, but to one who is hungry, everything bitter is sweet. And I don't want anybody to raise their hand. But how many of us have eaten so much that we got sick? You know? When you reach the point at which you can't put another bite in your mouth, you've probably eaten too much, right? And what's that? Well, sure. Overindulgence in, and I know that we're picking on food, but you know, you can be overindulging in anything. You can be overindulging in golf. You can be overindulging in baseball. You can be overindulging in baseball or football, food, drink, or whatever. The point is, you have to be under self-control to where you stop when you should stop, okay? And remember that a person who learns to be content learns the secret of living life to its fullest. What? Let's go to 1 Timothy 6. 1 Timothy 6, beginning in verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. So why are we trying to hoard so much of it? But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. All we need in this world is those things that we need that are necessary to sustain us, and that's food and clothing. We had, and as Paul said, I've learned to be content in whatever situation I'm in. And if there's anybody that knows about being under difficult circumstances or difficult situations, it would certainly be the Apostle Paul. Okay? That's in Philippians 4:11, by the way. I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. And there he was, of course, talking about whether it's physical, food-wise, confined or not confined, or whatever the circumstance may be. Okay? Now, verse 8. Verse 8, like a bird that strays from its nest is a man who strays from his home. A man who is always shifting, a person who is always shifting from one job to another or moving from one place to another, never finds contentment nor the happiness and comfort in a home life surrounded by friends. Now, that's not an indictment of those who move because their employment takes them somewhere else, okay? We're talking about someone who, for no good reason at all, or no apparent reason, just decides to, well, I don't want to be here anymore, so I'm going, okay? Or is never satisfied with whatever positive situation they are in. And I can tell you from experience, being in the military, that when you have to move every 3 or 4 years, it's difficult to develop long-lasting friendships with the ones you leave behind. Now, it is true that those of us that have been in the military have friends that go way back. I have a friend who lives right up in Reedley that I was stationed with back in the 70s. We're still friends. Okay? But the point being is that if you are restless just for restlessness' sake, you're not going to develop long-lasting friendships or associations. And you're not going to find contentment. It's the old proverbial, remember, the grass is not greener on the other side. Okay? Yes. Say again? Absolutely. Absolutely. Preacheritis, church hoppers, whatever you want to call it. Okay? No offense intended to the preachers in the audience. Okay. Any more comments on 7 or 8? Okay. Oh, yes, Mary. Say again. Uh-huh. Right. Right. Okay, now we're going to consider verses 9 through 13, which is another section of traits that everyone respects. Verse 9 is about pleasant words. Oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. And in context here, we're dealing with spiritual counsel, okay? That's what's most important, obviously, is the spiritual counsel that we receive earnestly from a friend. Okay? Sound counsel from one who is sincerely interested in your soul. Okay? That's what's most important. Okay? Verse 10 is about loyalty. Do not forsake your friend and your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother who is far away. Do not forsake those that have proven to be a friend to you. And here again, we're talking about in the church. Okay? Now, it is true that some of us have friends outside of the church that are good friends. They may still be rejecting our spiritual counsel, but you don't give up on them. Okay? But the point being here is that you don't forsake one who has proven truly to love you. Okay? In time of adversity, that person is more likely to be there for you than even your own brother. Okay? Now, my opinion, I believe that your best friend should be in the church. But that does not mean that you don't have good friends outside of the church that will be there standing by you also. Okay? And so we want to treasure and develop those relationships of people that we are closest to. And hopefully the person that you're closest to, obviously, is in the church. In times of trouble, remember, a neighbor is more of value than a brother who lives some distance away. Okay? And this means that we should all be seeking meaningful relationships with neighbors and family rather than with people who only seek fun but lack any substance. And here we're talking, again, spiritual substance. Okay? Verse 11. Be wise, my son, and make my heart glad, that I may answer him who reproaches me. This is not the only time that we've read in the Proverbs the importance of a wise child or a wise son. A wise son will find happiness for himself, but he also makes his father happy. Remember the Proverbs, the 10th chapter, as well as the 23rd chapter, talked about this same principle. Now, the important part of this proverb is that this needs to be applied spiritually. Okay? The principle applied spiritually means that God's name is blasphemed by those who know only a hypocrite that professes to be a Christian. Let's turn to Romans, the 2nd chapter. And I'm going to begin reading in verse 21. Now, in context here, Paul is talking about Jews who are professing to be Jews. Verse 21, he goes on to say, You then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You may say that one must not commit adultery. Do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law. For it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. In other words, it's of no value. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? In other words, if he's keeping the precepts of the law, then he's going to be regarded as a law keeper. Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code in circumcision, but you break the law. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. But a Jew is one who inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart by the Spirit, not by the letter. Christianity is about what you do, because what you do comes from the heart. It's not about professing to be one. You know, what's that old saying that goes that you're not a Christian just because you fill a pew? Okay? The last part of that verse, his praise is not from man, but from God. In other words, the one who truly lives the life that they're supposed to be living, not just professing to live that life. Okay? Any questions or comments about verse 11? Okay, verse 12 is about fleeing from evil. The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. This is really a repetition of what we read in Proverbs 22:3. Okay? And here the point is that a sincere Christian will always flee from evil. Okay? They will never involve themselves in a situation that they're, you know, if you can't control the situation and it's evil, get away from it. You know, if you can't be the solution, don't be part of the problem. That's the whole point. Okay? 1 Corinthians 6:18, we're to flee from sexual immorality because all immorality is evil. Okay? It's sin. 1 Thessalonians, the 5th chapter, verses 21 and 22, tells us that we're to test everything, hold fast to what is good, and abstain from that which is evil. Okay? A hypocrite enjoys the pleasure of sin while presenting himself or herself as a Christian. And you know what? It doesn't make any difference what that evil is, what the nature of that evil, because to God, evil is evil. There are no, you know, we as humans sometimes put categories on things. It doesn't make any difference what that evil is. A sincere Christian, a Christian who's trying to live a sincere Christian life, will always flee from that evil. Matthew, the 6th chapter, Jesus said in verse 24, you cannot serve two masters. You cannot live on both sides of the fence at the same time. Okay? 1 Peter 2:11, abstain from the passions of the flesh. Any comments, questions about that verse? Okay, verse 13. Now, verse 13 has some interesting wording to it that I don't know if you've ever done a lot of research on the particular word that is used in here, but maybe we can discuss part of it. Verse 13, take a man's garment when he has put up security for a stranger, and hold it in pledge when he puts up security for an adulteress. So that's the only time when it's bad, is when you put it up for an adulteress, huh? Okay. The Hebrew here, the Hebrew scholars say that that's a mistranslation. Okay? That what they're really dealing with here is anything foreign. All right? It could be a foreign woman. It could be a foreign man. It doesn't make any difference. Okay? That when you place it in context of what's being dealt with here, it's really about foreign. The same as it was over in, if you go back to 2016, where the same similar is given. Take a man's garment when he has put up security for a stranger, and hold it in pledge when he puts up security for foreigners. Okay? Why it was translated in the modern English versions to adulteresses here, because when you look at what's around it, there's no reason contextually to just automatically throw in an adulteress or an adulterer in the context, at least, of this particular part of the Proverbs. Okay? So it's really should more appropriately be, and if you make footnotes in your Bible, you might want to just write in there foreigner, as it is in chapter 20, verse 16. Okay, and the point here is that it's a foolish man who would guarantee the note for a stranger or even for companions who are irresponsible. Okay? If you don't know the person, you're a fool if you put up security for that person, if you don't know them. Okay? That's not to say that you shouldn't be good to foreigners, but the point being is that you don't want to put yourself on the line for someone that you don't know what their character is. Right? Any questions, comments on that particular verse, verse 13? Okay, again, we're going to shift gears a little bit. 14 and 15 go back to the other side, the negative side. Whoever blesses his neighbor with a loud voice, rise early in the morning, will be counted as cursing. I don't know that a lot needs to be said about that. But the point is that loud mouths are a nuisance. Okay? Every time I read this, I think about when we were in Vietnam. In Vietnam, there was a Armed Forces radio TV show that who was it? Robin Williams did a movie about, and it was actually true. There was a disc jockey on Armed Forces radio, and the way he used to greet everyone was "Good morning, Vietnam," and he was really loud about it. It used to drive us crazy. Because invariably the company clerk or something would put that over the loudspeaker in the compound, and everybody'd have to listen to it. There were very few good mornings in Vietnam, okay, and so it got to be a real nuisance. But the point is that no one really likes someone who is a loudmouth or obnoxious, as we talked about earlier. Okay, even if they're speaking flattery. Okay, after a while it gets a little old. Okay, and now verses 15 and 16 talk about contentiousness. Verse 15, yeah, I knew that. I knew I'd get a comment from somebody. Hey, listen, I'm not going to elaborate on these two verses. They speak for themselves, okay? We'll just move on. In verse 15, a continual dripping on a rainy day and a quarrelsome wife are alike. To restrain her is to restrain the wind or to grasp oil in one's right hand. Okay? Now, Proverbs 21, verses 9 and 19, Proverbs 19, 13b, all speak to the same issue. Why God put it in there, I don't know. Let's move on. Okay? The point is, I don't care whether it's a man or a woman. If you are continually contentious, you're going to destroy your marriage, especially. Okay? Whether you're a man or a woman. And all you ladies can ask the Lord why he picked on women in Proverbs when you see him. Maybe you can speak to Solomon about it. Okay? All right. What's that? Who? Solomon? Well, yeah. You know, it's really interesting. It's really interesting when you think about Solomon's situation. It's, is it any wonder he'd put Proverbs like this in here? Okay? Enough said. Okay, any more comments or questions through verse 16? Okay, verse Verses 17 and 18, again, are on the positive side because they speak, verses 17 and 18 speak to a good influence. Okay? Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. Whoever tends a fig tree will eat its fruit, and he who guards his master will be honored. Okay? There's a couple of really important principles involved here. Okay? And that is that the influence that one person bears over another can sometimes be very, very great. Okay? Both for good and bad. Okay? Both for good and bad. And the point is, in 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Okay? Depending upon which version that you're reading. But the point here, the principle is choose your friends carefully. Okay? Choose your friends carefully and foster the good relationships. Right? And if it's a bad relationship, you need to leave it alone. Okay? Now, verse 18 speaks to the principle that one reaps as that person has sown. Okay? If you take care of the things that you're provided, they will pay you back, so to speak. If you don't, again, they'll pay you back, but it's going to be a negative consequence. And a person who, for instance, in the point that's presented here, the person who takes care of what their master provides for them, okay, will be treated well by their master. Okay? If you are the master of your life and you allow Jesus to be your master, then you are going to receive the benefits of being under a good master. Okay? And then in verse 19, which also speaks to the same matter, as in water, face reflects face, so the heart of man reflects the man. It's something we were talking about earlier. Okay? I think Jason brought up the point. Okay? The point is that the true character of a person's heart will be reflected in whatever he does or whatever he says. Okay? Would someone read Matthew 7, verses 16 through 20, please? Matthew 7, verses 16 through 20. Okay? All right. Now, we're going to take a little short trip on just one verse, and that's verse 20. Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied, and never satisfied are the eyes of man. I think it's hell in the King James, New King James, and the NIV. It's Sheol in the New American Standard and ESV. And Abaddon, or its destruction, in the New King James and the NIV. It's Abaddon in the New American Standard and the ESV. Let's go to Revelation, the 9th chapter. And if you want to read the entire section, you can start in verse 1, but we're going to specifically read verse 11. They have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollyon. Now, Abaddon in Hebrew means destruction. Okay? Apollyon in Greek means destroyer. Okay? The point here is, in this proverb, okay, that A man who is controlled by the lust of the flesh or his eyes or the pride of life, as in 1 John, the second chapter addresses, verse 16, that person will never be satisfied. Okay? Now, you don't have to have been in an addiction, although many of us were. Believe it or not, smoking is an addiction. Okay? It doesn't make any difference whether it's drugs, food, alcohol, tobacco, whatever. A person who is in an addiction craves more, unfortunately. And that continual craving, they never become satisfied. You never become satisfied. That's why you crave more. And that's the point about a person who is controlled by the lust and their passions of what they see or what they feel because of their fleshly desires or what they want out in life that has nothing to do with what their needs are. No matter what you have, you're always going to want more. Okay? Because it is an addiction. Here's the principle about this. The craving or gratification increases if the addiction is fed. Carefully guard yourself, especially when it involves temptation, so that it doesn't keep leading you to transgression. That's the point of this proverb. Okay? And look, we're not asking anybody to reveal any secrets of their life. We know whether or not we have a weakness that continues, and I think I spoke about this out, I have weaknesses that continually trouble me. And I have to work at them all the time. And I don't think that I'm unusual in that regard. Okay? But the point is that when you know what that weakness is, you got to keep working at it, because if you succumb to it, it's going to take you right back down into the pig mire where you were. Okay? You got to continue to work at it. Okay? That's the admonition. That's the warning. Don't keep feeding that temptation or that evil desire. Because if you do, it's going to never end. At some point in time, you just got to say, that's it, no more. And I know there are people, including me right in here, that broke an addiction because we just decided, that's it, that's enough, okay? I was addicted to tobacco for several years. And I know I'm not alone in that, okay? But until I reached the point at which I said, enough is enough. It's contrary to living not only a healthy life, but the example that I show to others. Okay? Now, I recognize also that some addictions are harder to overcome than others. I recognize that. So sometimes we need extra help. But the point being is that until you decide that that addiction is enough and you're just ready to stop and just stop, it'll keep going on and on and on. It's got to come from within you. Okay? Got to come from within you. I saw a couple of Daniel. I don't disagree with you in that. I would just offer to you that the nature of addiction is that you can still be in Christ and still have an addiction, unfortunately. I was a Christian when I was smoking, okay? And I know that there's others that have had addictions, whether it was to alcohol or whatever. But you just reach that point at which, even if you are a Christian, you have to reach that point at which you say, enough is enough, It's contrary to good health. It's contrary to my Christianity. And that's it. Just no more, okay? So you do have to reach that point. Brian, was it you that had that? It's never filled. The bottomless pit, if you read in context there, especially the first 11 verses of chapter 9, is talking about this bottomless pit that never fills up. It never fills up. Just like Sheol is never satisfied. Hell is never satisfied. Okay? Man's eyes are, and here we're talking about uncontrolled lust. That's what we're talking about. Okay? An uncontrolled lust you will never satisfy until the point at which you reach the point where you take control of whatever that is. Okay, any final, we got 30 seconds. Okay, we'll finish up there on verse 20. So next week, Charles should be back with us, and we'll pick it up at verse 21 of chapter 27. Thank you very much for all your comments and everything.